That's a personal privilege. Gentleman from St. Louis County.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. In honor of Black History Month, I'm going to share the Battle of Island Mound. The Battle of Island Mound happened October the 29th, 1862 in Bates County, Missouri. The 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers versus the pro-Confederate guerrillas. Approximately 240 Kansas soldiers versus approximately 400 guerrillas. 8 Kansas soldiers were killed and 11 wounded. Guerrilla casualties were unknown. The 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers are victorious and entered the federal service a few months later. That small skirmish that occurred on October 29, 1862 at Mound Island in Bates County, Missouri was significant because it marked the first time during the American Civil War that a regiment of African American soldiers saw combat. The 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers who fought at Island Mound were in Kansas service prior to the Emancipation Proclamation implementation on January 1, 1863, but not in the U.S. service because the Lincoln administration was reluctant to enroll black troops and risked tipping Union slave states, including Missouri, toward the Confederacy. The area along the Missouri-Kansas border south of modern-day Kansas City was infested with many guerrilla bands. These bushwhackers, mainly pro-Confederate guerrillas, made life miserable, not only for the Union's military, but also for civilians on both sides of the border. Clay County, Missouri, especially, was a hotbed of bushwhackers activity. Several guerrilla bands, numbering over 500 bushwhackers and led by Colonel Sidney Jackman, were headquartered at Hog Island in the Canoe River, approximately 9 miles from Butler, Missouri. The only way to handle these guerrilla bands was to send federal military forces into the area. In mid-1862, though the federal government had far greater priorities for its limited manpower resources in the Missouri-Kansas border. William Matthews, captain of the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers, a fortuitous sequence of events gave U.S. Senator James H. Lane an opportunity to advance the radical Republicans' agenda for freedoms, civil rights. On May 22, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln appointed Lane the commissioner for recruiting the departments of Kansas. Then the U.S. Congress passed the Militia Act of 1862, which allowed African Americans to serve in a variety of roles in putting down the rebellion, including service in the military. Lane asked Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton for permission to raise an African American regiment on August 5th. Stanton delayed the reply until August 23rd and claimed that only the president could authorize the enlistment of blacks. Lane assumed, wrongly as it turned out, that Stanton's slow response implied approval. By the time Lane received Stanton's negative response, he had already recruited much of the regiment, focusing his efforts in the Leavenworth area. Lane and others raised what became the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers. Included in this ranks were Lieutenant Patrick H. Minor, the 1st Commissioned African American Officer, Major Benjamin Henning, the commanding officer at Fort Scott, ordered the 1st Kansas into Bates County on Sunday, October 1862, in response to bushwhackers' attacks along the borders. They were ordered to move on the guerrillas' nest at Hog Island. Captain Henry Seaman commanded the expedition into Bates County with 11 other officers and approximately 240 men in the 1st Kansas. And finally, 6 scouts. 6 scouts from the Kansas 5th Cavalry found out that the guerrillas' numbers approximately 400. The Kansas dug makeshift fortifications and turned the Tooth Man domicile into a blockhouse they called Fort Africa. The bushwhackers also knew of the 1st Kansas presence, and the sides attempted to gauge the opposition's strength with long-range skirmishing on Tuesday, October 28th. The bushwhackers decided to attempt to draw out a portion of the 1st Kansas by setting prairie fires on Wednesday, October 29th. Their hopes was that seamen would send out a portion of the 1st Kansas to investigate, and then the bushwhackers could easily destroy the isolated detachment. Seamen sent several detachments out, but with strict orders to stay within eyesight of Fort Africa. Unfortunately for seamen, none of the detachments stayed within eyesight. The bushwhackers were attacked, overrun of the initial detachment, and under Private John Sixkiller. Fortunately, the majority of the men survived the bushwhackers, charged an ensuing hand-to-hand combat until another element led by Captain Andrew Armstrong rescued the separated detachments of the 1st Kansas and chased off the bushwhackers. Armstrong's men collected the dead and wounded, as well as the separate detachment of the 1st Kansas, and returned to Fort Africa, ending the skirmish. The 1st Kansas suffered 8 killed and 11 wounded. Listening to local historian Jim Dean discuss the Battle of Island Mound at the Kansas City Public Library, although not a major fight, the skirmish at Island Mound proved to be an ominous harbinger for the Confederacy. Black soldiers had been bloodied on the battlefield for the Union's cause, and they proved to be up to the task. Although the Emancipation Proclamation, first announced by President Lincoln on September 22, 1862, would not go into effect until January 1, 1963, the skirmish at Island Mound laid the rest question about eventually fighting for the Union to end slavery. The 1st Kansas was redesigned to the 1st Regiment Kansas Volunteer Infantry. When it entered federal service on January 13, 1863, and was one of the first African-American units in the federal service, sadly though, the 2 black commissioned officers of the 1st Kansas, Captain William Matthews and Lieutenant Patrick Minor, were forced to give up their commission upon entry for service. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you.